So this was a question that came up in the chat during the presentation. How do we prepare our young people for the hard road of advocacy? So we're talking about holy troublemaking, and of course, that will eventually get us into trouble, right? So how do we prepare young people in particular in a way that's age appropriate and not too terrifying, but to help them understand that their welcoming stances won't be seen that way by everyone, that there might come a time when safety butts up against who we are called to be as people of God? What do you think?
Oh, I'm glad this came up because I have I have a few thoughts naturally. Um, One is that yes, we are telling holy troublemaking stories, and especially because we're talking right now during Holy Week, you can't really look at our formative story and look at Jesus, who was definitely a holy troublemaker, and not know that this often leads to challenges. You know, the kingdom of God, with its the last shall be first philosophy, is going to upset the status quo that is often not built around those values. And so, yes, a lot, the whole premise, and this is Bayard Rustin, who is like the North Star of this book, is that we need to use our collective creativity and energy and presence in a nonviolent way to challenge status quos when they are harming people. And being committed to doing that nonviolently is a big part of that. But learning to do that nonviolently also learns to that you will likely often like that is not necessarily what the people who are trying to uphold the status quo have agreed to. And so there is this challenge of understanding that this can be upsetting, with also knowing that we're not calling our kids to be martyrs or ourselves. Like, I always thought about that when the "what would Jesus do" thing went by. I'm like, well, Jesus was executed as a criminal of the state in his early 30s, and didn't have a family. Just like, there's a lot of situations, and not everybody is in a safe place to do this, right? Like, some people can afford to get arrested because they're at a peace protest. Some people can't, and that's okay. Holy troublemaking, and this is one of the things that we really tried to suss out in the curriculum, is not always big and bold. Like, the protest signs, the boycotts, those things are more attention getting, but also foundationally, it's a mindset. And so joy, like leaning into our birthright as joy, Reverend Jackie Wright's profile and her lesson really brings that out, is also deeply important. Rest is deeply important. You know, sitting in the more than human world, sabbathing and taking a rest from productivity is also holy troublemaking. So these are things that, especially I think, as we start to recognize that, like, the changes that need to happen in our society are multi-generational changes.
Hmm.
And I think we talked about intergenerational wisdom before. When we learn from the elders in movements ahead of us, they knew that. And they knew they weren't going to see all the change that they wanted to see in their lifetime, and that we still have a life to lead that is full of joy and goodness. And I think there has been a real issue in the progressive church space of like martyrdom and delaying joy until this is accomplished. And the challenge when we live in a state of constant crisis, which kind of since post 9/11, since the founding of this country, if you weren't a person in a privileged position, but for those of us who kind of had been clicking along, and suddenly, like, that has kind of, like, psychologically, the historians are placing that as a marker point, and there's kind of been one crisis after another, and with social media and smartphones, we're like continually on this loop. So actually teaching our young people to pause and rest and find joy and gratitude and know that that is just as deeply important as the next letter they might write to the representative, I think is also part of our holy work. Because I do think, and some of it's a little bit of white saviorism, of like, oh, we're aware, we're going to fix it. And recognize, like, there's a humility we need to know of, like, this is a way of living for, like, it has to be sustainable.
Absolutely. And I think it's really empowering for kids to understand that they don't have to wait until they're grown up to participate,
Mm-hmm.
and to participate fully.
Yes.
And they're great examples of that. And I think, I think all our kids should see the film Mighty Times about the Children's March in Birmingham, Alabama in, 1963, I think.
Mhm.
Because while adults may have dreamed that up, it wouldn't have happened without kids being willing and feeling very strongly about participating fully in something that had real impact, um, and
Mhm.
real consequences. And so it is a both and. It is not, one or the
Mhm.
other. Um, it's important for kids to know that they are making a difference in their everyday lives by who they're choosing to sit with at lunch
Mhm.
and who they're inviting into the game that they're playing,
Yeah.
and how they're standing up when they see something that's wrong. Um, it's all these are steps towards bringing about the kingdom right here, right now.
Thank
Yes, here, here, here.
you.
My littles wrote letters this week to our local. We live near a college, and they're about to cut down some beautiful old trees that are still totally healthy to make way for a new student center. And my 8-year-old, not by design, ended up handing it personally to the president. And some students and other community members spoke out, and some of those trees are being saved now.
Mm.
And it's little things, like I think that's in a huge part of the crises we face, is finding the tangible ways to take steps so that we don't get overwhelmed in the despair loop.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's a place where church can really make a difference.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, well, and Wendy, to that point, if I were a church leader and I was wholesale interested in this, but did not know kind of how to start, is there a first or second step that church leaders can take to sort of bring a congregation or their youth alongside to name, hey, holy troublemaking really matters here? What are some small, letter writing is huge, I think, Daneen.
Absolutely. Well, I'm a big fan of churches doing what they do with community partners. I don't think we need to invent our own uh, ways of doing good. And we don't do
Yeah,
these things because we're good. We do them because we're following Jesus.
that's
That's
right.
also really important. Um, so I think whatever your congregation is involved in terms of advocacy, in terms of however you term it, outreach or service in your community, there are ways of doing that will involve your kids. And if there aren't, if what you're doing is writing checks, well, that's something to look at and say, who do we need to get to know, who's got their boots on the ground, who's walking this road, and how can we walk alongside them.